Going to be doing a little work to the Firebird today. We're going to be replacing the power steering box, the pump, and the rag joint. I don't really need to replace the power steering pump, but it's a good idea to replace it whenever you're changing the power steering box. You don't want to run contaminants through your new power steering box. The reason I'm changing my box is because it has 150,000 miles on it and it's leaking from several seals. When I picked my power steering box out, there were a couple different ratios. This car had the quick ratio power steering box from the factory. Right now the wheels are centered and basically you go all the way to one way. It's one turn, two turns, about 2.5 lock to lock is what they call it. The wheels hitting at stop. So I'm of course going to replace it with the same type of power steering box. I'm going to take the pump out with all the brackets on it, just so I can take it apart the bench and show you how it all goes together. There's a couple of bolts for the adjustment on the belt, and a couple of them go through the alternator. So I'm going to disconnect the positive, loosen the alternator up, and take all the mounting bolts for the power steering pump bracket off. And I might even attempt to take out the pump and the steering box as one without disconnecting the hoses. We'll see how that works out. So the positive battery cable is disconnected. I'm going to go ahead and loosen up this top bolt. You can see the adjustment come right out of that belt. I can take that belt off now. And I'm going to take this pivot bolt out because that's going through the power steering pump bracket. So here's the column. I got my socket and one of those two nuts on the rag joint. I'm going to go ahead and back that off as such. Alright, got an 1.5/16 socket on the old impact gun. We're going to see if we can get this nut off of the pitman arm and holds it on there. Like butter. Here I got my pitman arm puller, made in the USA, KD puller. I like to oil the threads up on these before I press. Go and get that fixed up on there, see what happens. Alright, it's got the pitman arm on here, it fits perfectly. Have my safety glasses on, we'll see if we can get this thing to pop off. She comes. I had a Chinese pitman arm puller at one point and it broke. Just goes to show you that those tools aren't even worth buying. The power steering box is held onto the frame by these 3 bolts. There's actually a 4th boss in it, threaded boss, but it doesn't feel like there's a bolt in there. So we'll take these 3 bolts out and see if we can get the box to drop out with the pump. Okay, I have the 3 bolts out that hold the power steering box to the frame, and we'll see if we can get this to separate from this rag joint. I'll take a screwdriver or something. So amazingly, I was actually able to get the pump and the power steering box out in one piece without even making a mess. And next thing you want to do is make sure you got the right parts. Here's my power steering pump from, and it's missing a bolt boss and the return lines in the opposite location. No big surprise that I still made the wrong part again. So I'm probably just going to reuse the pump I had and I'll see if I can flush it out by hand. So luckily Napa sold me the correct power steering box, I hope. You know, as long as the steering ratios are right, it should be the right one. And I'm going to go ahead and take this one fitting off this power steering box, throw it on the new one, and new rag joint. The reason we're replacing that is this rag joint here is 40 years old and looks like it's the original. It actually has an electrical connection in it. So I don't want that failing on me anytime soon. And the rag joint, if you look at it, actually has a flat spot on it, so it only goes on the power steering box one way. So I'll go ahead and install that now. So here's my new power steering box. I took the plug out where I'm going to replace this this barb, and you can see that this barb is actually a flare fitting. You can see the other end inside here that beats to it. So I'm not going to put any Teflon tape on there. And an O-ring came out of it, and I'm not going to use that because again, this is a flare fitting. So I am going to in fact flush my old power steering pump, and I'm starting by just running all the old fluid out of it. And to do that, I'm using a hand drill. Let's make it a little messy. You can see how brown that fluid is. Now I'm just going to top it off with some fresh power steering fluid and repeat the process until I get clean power steering fluid coming out of my pump. Probably could have did this in the car, but I didn't realize that I was going to be reusing this pump. This pump is actually not the original pump that came with the car. Takes a minute to prime. Look how clean that fluid is. I'm going to call it flush. Mushroom cloud.
There it is, huh?
Yep. One flushed pump. So I'm getting ready to put this on now, and you can see this bolt actually has to be completely removed to slip this on. It's going to end up going in this groove on this spline shaft, just like a shifter on a motorcycle. We got the rag joint tapped on, and the clearance is so tight where this bolt needs to go that the edge of the bolt is actually hitting the box. So I ended up having to grind that down. And I'm going to go ahead and throw a little Loctite up on her and send her home. So I have my rag joint bolted down now, and it actually doesn't matter how you bolt this back up when you reinstall it. It's all the way in one lock right now. 1.5, 1, 1.5, 2, 2.5, just a little over 2.5. So this is in fact the right power steering box. Cleaning up the old pitman arm for assembly, I noticed there's a ton of play in this thing. And since I'm working towards getting alignment, I'm going to go ahead and replace the center link and idler arm and quite possibly the inner and outer tire ends. This pitman arm is actually a non-wear item. You can see the ball is in the center link, and the pitman arm doesn't have any ball ends. Just found center on the power steering box with the rag joint. Getting ready to install the power steering box, and we're going to have an assistant sit in the car and hold the wheel square. Looks like you might be trying to hide behind that post there. Is it good?
Yeah, it's great.
After bolting up the new power steering box to the steering column with the wheel centered and the steering box centered, I straightened up the wheels and hooked up the pitman arm. You can see there's a notch in the spline shaft, so it pretty much only goes on one way. Just to be safe, I'm going to put a little bit of high strength Loctite on the nut that holds the pitman arm on the power steering box. I'll of course reinstall the lock washer. So I have the power steering pump back in place and filled it up, ran the wheels back and forth a couple times, shut it off, checked it was low, filled it up, repeated that process about 3 times. Now it's staying where it needs to be. I believe all the air is bled out of it, and I'm going to take it for a test drive. Rolling down the road here, you can see with the wheel in the straight position,